All right. And with that, I think we will get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alexandra, and I work with the City of Sunnyvale. And today I will be moderating this webinar along with the City of Milpitas. Along with our co-sponsor, Bosqua and the City of Milpitas, and our instructor, Juanita Salisbury, I want to welcome all of you to our class tonight. So before we go into the webinar, I'd like to provide some guidelines for successful participation tonight. First, all attendees are muted by default, and our instructor, we will actually be taking all questions at the end of tonight's webinar. So make sure to ask your questions in either the Q&A or in, you can raise your hand and use your raise your hand option, and we will call on you to unmute and ask your question. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we would just like to say that. All right. So now I would like to share a little background on Bosqua's landscape education program. So Bosqua represents 26 agencies that include cities, water districts, a water company, and a university that purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System. They provide 1.8 million people water and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. Bosqua's goal is for high quality supply of water at a fair price. All right. So while we have made significant strides in water use efficiency in the past decade, there's still more room for improvement. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosqua service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our communities are met. Bosqua has additional ways to save water. So one of those is through the I Love Gray Water system, which gives up to $200 in rebates for connecting a washing machine to a gray water system. There's also a Bosqua Lawn Be Gone rebate, which gives residents various rebates for transforming their lawns and making them more water efficient. For more on that, please visit Bosqua's website. All right, another new addition for Bosqua is the Smart Controller program, which provides instant rebates and heavily discounted pricing on the purchase of the Ratio 3 irrigation controller. This controller can be operated straight from your phone and normally retails for $280, but through this program, customers can purchase the controller for $100 plus tax. And there's also an optional rain garden rebate program in which all garden projects that meet the minimum requirements will be rebated or given money back, $300. For more information on that, please visit bayareaconservation.org. All right, so the City of Sunnyvale also has some ways you can save water. So we offer $1 per square foot of rebates for replacing your lawns and plants that require a lot of water with drought tolerant plants and permeable hardscape. We also offer up to $200 in rebates for properties that connect a clothes washer to a gray water irrigation system. You can learn more about this at sunnyvale.ca.gov/savewater. Also, are you looking for compost? Well, you can stop by the Sunnyvale Smart Station from Monday through Sunday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with your own shovel and container. We offer free compost and mulch. Great, so now I will pass it over to Linda at the City of Milpitas.
Hi everyone, we're excited to host this webinar, Linda at Milpitas. So we are similar to Sunnyvale. We work with Valley Water to provide rebates to our customers. So this includes the landscape rebate program. The city has actually cost shared to increase the rebate. So Milpitas residents can get $4 per square foot of lawn replaced with drought tolerant plants. We also work with Valley Water on irrigation equipment upgrades and rainwater capture rebates. You can learn more at savewatermilpitas.org. Now is a great time to utilize these resources through what you're learning from the presentation today. Here you can see some more tips on how you can do sustainable landscapes, talking about replacing your lawn with drought-tolerant plants. And additional information on water-wise gardening can be found at southbaygreengardens.org. Plus, they have some landscape designs templates there as well. Valley Water has an e-newsletter if you want to keep up to date with the water district's programs. And then join us for upcoming workshops. Yeah, please check out bayareaconservation.org for upcoming workshops. We're excited to be hosting the Drought Hacks webinar, and we'll actually have some additional ones that will be added soon. Great. Now let me introduce our instructor. So Juanita Salisbury has a PhD in biopsychology, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture. In 2009, she established Juanita Salisbury Landscape Architecture after working for commercial and residential design firms. She has recently turned her focus to California native plant pollinator habitats, and in 2016 established the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, the first of 5 pollinator habitat gardens in Palo Alto. The gardens combine her educational background, the biology and behavior of food intake with design expression born from landscape architecture. Her focus is to research and educate about these habitats, as well as exploring opportunities to install more of them. Juanita, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Linda. Let's see, share screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on. All right, let me pull that forward here. Okay, so hello everybody. Thank you for coming this evening. I'm assuming you can now see this.
Yes, all good.
Very good. I'm Juanita Salisbury, as Linda mentioned, and I started the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden here in Palo Alto in 2016. And now we have 5 gardens, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. We also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. We have 5 gardens, the Island Drive Garden, Arcadia Place, Hopkins, the Gwynda Street Garden, and then the first garden, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. And we are trying to connect these 2 gardens along Embarcadero Road in Palo Alto. That's an ongoing project, and hopefully we will get that completed in the next couple of years. It's about another 17,000 square feet, so we have a ways to go. Gardens are in public areas, they're always open. Most of the plants are labeled, and so the plants I'm talking about this evening, you can actually go and see how they do in a public situation. So an overview of what we're talking about tonight in terms of planting. We're going to look at an ecosystem approach to using native plants, and then talk a little bit about some of the maintenance and other considerations for taking care of those plants. Firstly, let's talk about plants. Plants are the beginning of everything. They are the primary producers of food and the basis of the food chain. This I call my photons to proteins slide, where we take energy from the sun and through plant action, photosynthesis is turned into protein by the animals that eat them, basically the larvae of insects. And then those fat, juicy larvae then get pushed into the food chain. And in this example here, it is a nice tasty meal for a baby bird. And as a rule, and this is critical, native insects, the insects that are here, that were here for thousands of years, only eat those plants that they evolved with, basically those native plants. Insects are picky eaters. They only like specific chemicals. And if you have a lot of non-native plants, you're just not converting that sunlight efficiently into energy that the rest of the food chain can use. So plants really aren't decorations. I like to think about plants in their functional sense. What are they doing in the environment? What is their actual function? Plants are food. That's their function. This means that when you plant natives, your garden will attract many native pollinators, and in turn other insects that eat those plants, and then in turn birds and lizards and other things that like insects as food sources. So native plants really support elements then for sustaining life. Why is it important to see native plants as food? When you plant native plants, these native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects. And when you realize how attractive it is, the flip side of attracting these insects is that you want to avoid creating what's called an ecological trap. And what that means is that an ecological trap is something in the environment that attracts insects and other organisms, and because of that attraction, makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. And so you will have an abundance of life. You just want to make sure that they can live to reproduce. And why California native plants? California is awesome. We have a biodiversity hotspot here in California, one of about 30 or so on the entire planet. So we have something very special. We have almost 8,000 species of plants, some that are found nowhere else on the planet. And more than any other state in the United States, many of our species are drought tolerant. And we have 1,600 species of native bees, more than any other state in the United States. Across the United States, there are 4,000 bee species. We're not counting honeybees, those are not native. And with all these native plants, you're going, why do we have so many? And it's because we have so many unique ecosystems in California, and we have unique pollinators as well. So we have an abundance of both things. And so that translates into a lot of different plant species. And this becomes really important if you want to do something that's good for the planet and, you know, help life continue on the planet. We know that in places around the planet, insect species are declining worldwide. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places they are declining. In some places, 70%, they're seeing 70% decline of insect species. When you have a native plant garden, the native plant garden enhances connectivity and complexity in the landscape. So the more plants that you have in a landscape, the more they support each other. What we're going to do is generate a community of plants. And in that community, they do support each other like a good community does. And that leads to less irrigation, which of course we're talking about water here, but it doesn't mean less plants. Less water does not mean less plants. So as you add more plants, you're building this community of plants and organisms that support each other. They share water, they share nutrients and information. They have some intelligence. So imagine a machine where you're adding the right parts, in this case, the right plants, and you basically are building an engine with all these components. And when you have this beautifully complex engine, it just then becomes self-assembling and living. And a goal to start with, think maybe 20 different species of native plants local to your area. So that's one takeaway here. 20 species is a good start. And in this diagram to the right, I'm just kind of illustrating some of the connectivity things from the groundwater with this taproot of this tree reaching down, and then these lateral surface roots spreading it out and sharing it with the other plants, because the roots will interconnect. And plants have a social structure. They do communicate with each other. It's just a chemical communication that we don't understand completely. And then the trees, the water, other plants will actually release water into the atmosphere, and we can form clouds that way. So lots of connections that can be made between these living things and the rest of the environment. What do we mean by plant community, though? So if you go to the vegetation glossary on the California Native Plant Society website, they say that a plant community is a group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and the responses to the environment that they share. Typically, the plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other. That means they play well together, they like each other, they're old friends. And so that community is something that you want to build. So an insight here, when you're building a community, you create a very specific framework. And that framework then, a lot of other things, insects and other animals, will rely on those plants. So when you're building that community, you must take into consideration those organisms. And California has many different kinds of plant communities. We have coastal scrub, we have coastal prairies, we have oak chaparrals, we've got deserts, we've got redwood forests, and so forth. Lots of different types of environments. And the plant communities are basically a function of the pollinators that live in them. Pollinators, bees most generally, spread around genetic material. And they spread that genetic diversity of plants for other insects to eat. So bees are basically kind of like farmers. They're basically moving plants around in the environment for other things to then eat. And what you want then is to aim for the majority of native plants in your garden to be local species and appropriate for your plant community. And here we have the northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore. Wonderful hike if you ever want to take that 9.5-mile round trip up to the very northern tip. You'll see things like these beautiful coastal poppies, the beautiful Cirsium occidentale, variety occidentale, the cobweb thistle, which is a beautiful plant, pokey but beautiful, lupins and other things. And I can tell you that the bees love these plants. So again, bees are taking that genetic material. Okay, so here's a lady bee here, collecting pollen from Monardella villosa, and that's genetic material that then is moved around to other flowers so that those flowers become fertilized, and then they create seeds. And then those seeds scatter and more plants occur. So you're going, okay, native plants, what do we plant? The handy resource is done by the California Native Plant Society. This website, calscape.org. It's an easy to use searchable database. Provides information and resources. You can find all kinds of California native plants on this website. And from that, you create your plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. And I took a screenshot of the website actually, and it's a great resource. They've got planting guides. So if you're not exactly sure what to do, the planting guide is very helpful. Places to get the plants, the nurseries, you can create Excel spreadsheets of plant lists. And then butterflies, what's that about? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But you can see they've listed 7,990 plants native to California. So literally so many things to choose from. And they break it down into categories for you of all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, and so on. And you can search by name or you can search by location. That's how you know what's local. Search by your location, a list will pop up and you're good to go. It's really, they make it easy. But then again, here's the better question. Instead of what to plant, let's talk about who to feed, because we know that the function of plants is to provide a way to access the sun's energy, and that those native plants will feed those native insects that are here. And here in California, we have 1,368 species of butterflies and moths. And this website tells you what they eat. And so if you have an opportunity to plant something that feeds 5 larvae or something that feeds 50 larvae, go with the thing that feeds 50 larvae, because it's, in terms of the environment, it's more bang for the buck in the food chain. And so biology is super important. We're talking about living things here, so it's all like, consider the biology here. What we know about what happens with pollinators, with species of bees flying around, moving genes around, we know that the plants undergo speciation much more rapidly than you would have that speciation if they were wind pollinated. Some plants release a lot of pollen, goes into the wind, and maybe it will end up on another plant and then fertilize it. When you have bees, you have something that's actually moving that pollen around for you. And so you can develop more varieties of plants more quickly than if you don't have those. So those biological factors then become a really important consideration in terms of planting, rather than those non-biological factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. So consider the living things that will help you leverage this immense power of biology. That's really the secret to it. And in Santa Clara County, we have 87 species of butterflies and moths that are native. And this is a beautiful gray hairstreak butterfly on an aster in my home garden. I do a lot of macro photography, and that shows up a lot on my social media. So when you're selecting plants, what I tell people is, in terms of the sequence, what do you do first? You start with your big stuff, your trees and large plants first, because they're big and unwieldy. And then you start with your shrubs and then perennials. So start with the big stuff, then go to the medium stuff, and then smaller. So fit in as many trees as you can in your site. And then your shrub layer should compose about 60% of all of the plants, so lots of shrubs. And to keep things looking green and lush, focus on those evergreen shrubs, the things that don't lose their leaves all at once, the things that keep their leaves, because then you don't have that really dry, sort of deserty look. You can have something that's green and lush. If you have things that have like glossy green leaves, those are going to give you that sort of tropical sense without actually being in the tropics. And then as you collect more and more plants, add things in over time, like more grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, ground covers, and vines. And then aim for a mix of herbaceous and woody perennials, so the things that die back to the ground, then sprout again. You want to plant during the late fall and the winter for best results. That's when the soil is nice and cool and moist, easier to dig during those conditions. And I always like to use those smaller pots whenever I can, the 4-inch pot or a 1 gallon if I have to, or seeds even, anything where I don't have to dig a hole. If you've done a bunch of gardens and you've dug hundreds of holes. You want a small thing as possible because it's just easier, and I'm all about making it easier. And then once you plant things that are small, I like to put a physical barrier on the top of it, like chicken wire or a wire basket of some kind, just to keep the squirrels and other things from uprooting it until they can establish a nice good root structure. So start with trees, keystone trees. What do we mean by keystone? So those keystone plant genera, the genera, not genuses, keystone plants form the backbone of habitat resources. They provide food, shelter, and nesting sites. And those keystone species are those species that help other plant species survive. They provide food for dozens or hundreds of other types of caterpillar species upon which other animals depend. So if you think about a stone arch where you have the middle stone, the keystone, holding everything up, that is what a keystone species is. And so the insight here, by supporting large numbers of other organisms, those keystone species provide critical connections with other things in the environment. Okay, so the more things it feeds, the more connections that you get with a lot of different organisms. So the takeaway technique from this is to include at least a few keystone plant species to provide something that's going to be more resilient in your native garden. So tree species, we have 13 tree species native to Santa Clara County. I'm not going to go into this too much. If you don't see what you like on this list, look at San Mateo County or make it a little bit wider. Really, you can't go wrong by planting native. And here we go, trees help save water. So this is why I really focus on trees. It's like whenever I have a space in a garden, I think, oh, what tree could I put in here rather than some little dinky perennial? I want something as big as chunky as I can get that will really provide a lot of connections. Trees do a lot in the environment in terms of some of those climate things that we are so concerned about. They absorb water and release it into the air, cooling it and cleaning it. And trees form half of the rain cycle. The water that they release is very much like the water that evaporates up off of the ocean and gets transported over land and then drops down on the mountains. The other half of that story is the rivers that trees provide in the atmosphere from that released water. When you don't have trees, obviously deserts can form. They improve water quality by filtering rainwater and slowing down the impacts of heavy rain. They reduce flooding and they stabilize soil. Really, a tree is a lot of bang for your buck in terms of the environment and saving water. Here we have an example of our live oak here. This is at Foothills Preserve, and there's my 6'3" tall husband here. Maybe not a good choice for the front yard, but if you have a large enough space, these can be really good. If you don't have room for a big oak, you can try a scrub oak, which is much smaller. With trees, we can actually help the climate. We can change the atmosphere. We find that clouds form more often over forested areas than non-forested areas. So let's plant those forests. Every spare piece of ground, plant a tree, and we'll get more clouds. Those cooling effects of clouds and the carbon dioxide that they capture, the trees, more than offset the reflection of the sun during times when the deciduous trees are bare. That is when they drop their leaves. So the benefits of trees, even the ones that drop their leaves, outweigh any sort of negative effects. And, it's good for the atmosphere. It's good for the climate. One of my favorite trees that I like to plant whenever I have an opportunity and space is the Quercus lobata, or the valley oak. And I always try to find a space for an oak of some kind, and because no other trees come close to providing all the ecosystem services that oaks provide. Hands down, oaks are, they're insect factories. In Santa Clara County, they used to be 61% of the tree cover. Now it's about 1%. They actually grow pretty quickly. They are deciduous, but those leaves are actually ecosystem gold. They do so much in the environment just by being underneath the tree. Okay, you'll have more things like butterflies and moths and bees living and overwintering in that leaf litter under a tree. Keeps those roots nice and cool and moist. You can grow native species under these pretty easily. They can live 600 years, and they're valuable trees. They can add value to your property. And they look great. They're wonderful trees. And this is the Hopkins Avenue garden with the big, beautiful valley oak that's popping up there. And there's actually a couple of babies coming up too. I don't know if it's offspring of this one or the squirrels brought it over from someplace else. Oaks like to be in groups. If you don't have room for an oak, you might say, gosh, Juanita, what can I fit into my yard if we don't have very much space? Well, here's a list of a dozen species I have in my own dinky yard. Our lot is about 6,000 square feet, which is, you know, maybe we have 1,000 square feet of area for planting because our house takes up most of the lot size. But these are the trees I have, and these are some of my go-to trees. The bigger ones are on the north side of the property, so they don't shade out solar panels. That's another story. But some of my favorite ones, I tell people, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but one of my favorite ones is Cercocarpus betuloides, the mountain mahogany. It's evergreen, it grows quickly, it doesn't get real huge, maybe 20 to 30 feet tall. Love that one. That one's a really super one. The other one I suggest for evergreen is Prunus ilicifolia, the holly leaf cherry. It has a beautiful white fluffy blossom on it, so you get lots of pollinators, super low water use, and provides a cherry, which is not really edible. Birds like it though. And a lot of other things. I have things like the elderberry. I actually have a willow in my yard. Surprisingly enough, you can do a willow if you're willing to hand water it, which I do. Acer negundo, box elder. The toyon. The toyon is a great tree, evergreen. I really have never watered this one. So, you know, how great is that? And it grows really quickly. So a lot of different types of things. Some of the Arctostaphylos, the manzanitas, grow into tree sizes. Our street tree is the Modesto ash. And then I just have crammed in a bunch of other smaller trees like the hazelnut, which is a fun one, and the redbud, and I have some other things here, Acer macrophyllum. So a lot of things. Trust me, you have room. And I didn't even include the 2 scrub oaks that I have. All right. So moving away from trees, now we can talk about shrubs a little bit. There are 29 species native to Santa Clara County. Everything they're calling willows, shrubs. There's some overlap. But again, choose things that are evergreen so that your yard stays green all year round. You just like have like stems sticking out everywhere and it looks depressing about August and September. What I like to do is rank by number of butterflies and moths hosted, and then choose what will fit in that location and your water needs. And if you don't see what you like, expand the search area a little bit. We have lots and lots to choose from, really a lot of great shrubs. Then add some native perennials. I'm not going to go into those, but literally there are perennials that provide flowers in every color of the rainbow. So much to choose from. It can be overwhelming. That's why I say start with the big stuff and then slowly add the small stuff in over time. If you want instant color, you know, do some native annuals. These will reseed themselves in place. You know, seeds are cheap, and once you seed them in, chances are you'll have them forever. And they just attract so many different kinds of pollinators in the spring. It's pretty crazy and really fun to watch the show when everything comes in and the bees are buzzing around and like flying everywhere, and it's just really magical. One of my favorites to plant, especially if you want your neighbors to be envious, is the Clarkia Ammonia. Just look at those juicy colors right there. And those, I just took the seeds, threw them on the ground, and that's what I got for that particular bit of effort. You just can't go wrong with those. So when you're placing plants, so let's talk a little bit about the basics of plant layout. You know, what I always tell people is like, use a piece of graph paper to make a plan. That way you can have a square equals 1 foot, and that way everything is to scale. What we mean is, like, if your squares on your graph paper are 1/4 inch, you'll have a 1/4 inch equals a foot. That's the scale. And then you can add your plants from your plant palette, figure out where the trees go, show them at their mature diameter. This is how you make sure that you don't crowd things in so that things get covered up. You'll want to aim for things to be touching or overlapping a little bit. You know, they can be closer together as well, but this is a good place to start to get, then you have quantities of plants. So you'll know, like, you have 3 large green things here, 3 of the smaller ones of these blue things, and so forth. So think about your diameters and then draw those in. I always like to make sure I have a pathway going through that adds structure so that I can get in there and maintain those areas. Plant the large things first, the trees, then the shrubs, and then the perennials. Okay, so it's like a 3-step process. And then once those are in, you can start adding other things as you have space. Let's talk about moisture in the environment, because we're all wanting to save water because we are in a drought here. If you're thinking, okay, well, I want to get like the lowest water use plants possible, how can I find out how much water these plants are using? They say they're low water, but what does that mean? So the internet has the answer. The Water Use Classification of Landscape Species is an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species, and is published by the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Department of Water Resources. And so plants are ranked based on the percent of water that a lawn uses. So something that's really high is the same as a lawn. Okay, and a lawn can use half of your water budget outside. So, you know, you want something that's going to use less than that. So your really low water use plants are going to be maybe 1/10 of the use that a lawn would be. So that's a huge reduction in the amount of water that you can have if you have plants that are getting watered maybe once every 3 weeks rather than twice a week like a lawn might use. So really can really lower your water use. I'm all about like trying to conserve moisture in the environment. I always think that moisture is best when it's being used by living things, because water is life. And life uses water. So where should the water be? Water can be trapped in the environment underneath rocks and mulch and things. And so, for example, you can trap water in the environment by using like something like a stone here to provide a shaded spot that will stay cool and moist underneath. And so these 2 plants, exactly the same plant, Erysimum franciscanum, this one had a rock next to it. This one a couple of feet away did not. So obviously this one did much better when its roots were cool and moist. So when I was talking about leveraging that immense power of biology to bring in and keep moisture in your garden, think of juicy things, okay? Things that will hold moisture for you, okay? Because this is how we keep the circle of life moving. Use those plants that have that deep taproot that will go down into the water table and pull up the moisture, and then share it with all those other creatures that have connections with it. You can use those native succulents, okay, that store water in their tissues. Things like bulbs. Bulbs store water in their tissues. Fleshy crowned plants store water in their tissues. And then the animals that eat those plants store water in their tissues too. So I always like to think about these organisms, plants and animals, as sort of like reservoirs of moisture. And so we can have lots of different kinds of reservoirs of moisture to keep the water in the environment. And so when we're looking at, how we're using those outdoor spaces, again, try to think, how can I be really optimal in terms of my decisions? And really, it's all about function, okay? As I said before, lawns can use up to 50% of that outdoor water use. So consider the function. What is the lawn used for? Okay. People occasionally walk on it, but look at where everybody is in the party. They're all on the patio. Okay. So is this lawn really necessary? Something to think about. If you're just looking for a big swath of green, why have a lawn that has to be mowed, watered a couple of times a week, raked and, lawn blown and things, it's just a lot of like work, and you pay for a lawn service to come in. So there's a lot of cost involved. However, if you replace that big swath of green with something like a native ground cover, like this beautiful ceanothus, and this is Ceanothus thriciflorus Yankee Point, about 15 inches tall, grows pretty rapidly. It's evergreen, beautiful blue blossoms that are fragrant, super low water use, once a month maybe when it's established. And it's a larval food source for 83 species of butterflies and moths. That's what I call a bang for your buck plant. And it looks great. And whereas lawns, it's a love-hate relationship. You can't really walk on this, but it really has the same function as a lawn in terms of providing sort of a big green swath of ground cover. So what I was alluding to in the previous slide is that a native garden is less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. Basically, when we're taking care of our native gardens, mostly it's keeping the weeds at bay. You want to irrigate your plants to establish about once a week, and you're basically installing those in the wintertime. So if it doesn't rain during that week, then you're going to water them. The irrigation that you do should encourage those roots to search for water just outside of where the root ball is. So they start digging in and hanging on and looking for goodies and getting connections. You want to prune sparingly and basically to control dead material for fire safety. You don't even have to fertilize these things. Amend very sparingly. Native plants don't like fertilizer, saving money again. Mulch to control weeds initially and to help establish plants, then mulch with leaves. Okay, so again, a money saver. Use leaves that fall on the ground, push those underneath the plants. If you like the look of mulch, you can do like a 1 chip thick wood bark on the top to make it look uniform and to hold those leaves in place. You can leave some bare areas of dirt for those ground dwelling bees. About 70% of our native bees will actually nest underground. Don't use leaf blowers in the planted areas. Those leaf blowers generate winds up to 70 miles an hour, and you're going to dry out those larvae that you were trying to generate butterflies and moths with, and they will blow right off of there. Instead, use those blowers to clean off hardscape like patios, and try to use electrically powered blowers. I think we have a law that's coming into play now where we have to use electrically powered machines now to reduce those fumes and emissions that poison the air. And don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. So basically a lot of things that you don't have to do, just weed occasionally, and really a lot less work than a non-native yard. And remember, we talked about how attractive these plants are. You are going to have larvae on these plants. Don't freak out when you see caterpillars and inchworms and all these things. These are all food, and this is exactly what you want. Most people think of insects as the adults, things that fly around, butterflies, bees, but the adult lifespan of an insect is actually very short. They spend much more time as an egg or a larva. Not all of them, but in general, it's kind of a rule of thumb. So you're going to have things that are going to be overwintering for a few months, maybe in leaf litter and in those areas that you're not using leaf blowers, okay? But again, you're saving a lot of moisture in the environment by allowing these insects to accumulate moisture inside their bodies. And then those little bags of nutrients and moisture then get transported up the food chain, where we have beautiful birds singing and nature happening and exploding all around us. And it all started with those native plants. So pruning, everybody always talks about pruning. I'm lazy. I don't like to prune, which is great because I have native gardens. And my pruning decisions have been based now on a lot of the observations that I do. And I spend a lot of time looking at insects, at what they do, what's happening. I have been doing weekly observations of each of these gardens for about 6 years now, since 2016. So a lot of information on, just what's happening in these gardens. So one of the things that male bees do when they're taking a break from looking for ladies is that some bees will grab onto a stem and sleep that way. So the mandible will actually grasp a branch and they take a nap that way. Male bees don't have a nest to go back to. They sleep in flowers, or accumulate. Sometimes you'll see a bunch of male bees like sleeping together on a branch. And so I like to leave some stems for them to take a little nap on. So the pro tip here, do a little bit at a time. If you need to do more, go for it. But if you do a tiny bit at a time, it's a lot easier than spending hours and hours at once. So a little bit goes a long way. And one of the things that we know is that insects, actually bees, will nest inside of hollow stems. And so when you're cutting back plants that are dead, a lot of them have these pithy stems, right, with the open center. And if you leave about a foot of stem from the ground up, bees will actually lay eggs in these hollow areas on top of each other. And it's amazing to see. I have bees that nest inside of the stems in my own yard. Pretty incredible. Again, pruning decisions, as I said before, I like to minimize the amount of work that I do. So in my own home yard, I left the asters. Once they had gone to seed, the seed heads were actually quite fluffy. And one morning I saw a hummingbird come out here and pull the fluff off. And I thought, oh my God, nature has a plan for everything. So I just had to either be patient or lazy, or a combination of both, for nature to show me what it had planned to do with the fluff. I could have cut it back and thrown it into the compost bin, but then a hummingbird wouldn't have had the nest building material. So if you want to help the stems break down, you can spritz them with a little bit of water and they'll break down sooner. But, don't be in a hurry, because sometimes you get to see things like this. And this is at the Primrose Way garden. And that is a hummingbird picking fluff off of the goldenrod that I did not, I was going to trim it actually that morning. And then this happened and it was like, oh, but who knew that they collect fluff in January for their nests. I did not know that they nested so early in the year, but that, sure enough, that's what she was doing. Pretty amazing. I was like, I better get a video of that. Whipped out my phone and there you go. All right. So old stems, like we have a lot of these verbenas. This is a really great shrub. Again, lazy takes over. And what happens is that the new growth that you see here eventually covers up all the old stuff, so you don't see it. Provides a lot of complexity in the environment, places for birds to hide. If you are worried about fire, go ahead and prune. But, in these locations, it's not really a big deal. I leave it because I want to see what nature has to tell me about what it does with my laziness. Again, shelter and nesting. This in my own yard, I have bamboo stakes. I have clumping bamboo that I grow for its my mini forest where I get garden stakes. And sure enough, the bees nest inside those. And here's a little lady leaf cutter bee coming out, really cute. And again, I'd like to pile up some logs and things to create nesting areas in the environment. So the more little niches that you provide, things will, if you provide food, they're going to need shelter too. And so all these complicated, complex areas provide shelter for all kinds of organisms. So leaves as mulch, as I mentioned before, leaves as mulch are ecosystem gold. They help prevent weeds. They absorb water like a sponge. They filter water, hold in soil moisture. Again, less work just to leave them. Plants and seedlings can grow up through leaves. As you can see, there's sprouts here. There's even an oak tree coming up. And eventually they cover up anything that was left. So literally by not doing anything, and it looks like this. So again, less work is the way nature intended. Shelter, again, those piles of leaves, those valley oak leaves. This is the Cersei Society information here. The lady queen here will hide out for the winter until she starts a new colony. And she likes to burrow down and hang out in those leaves. But if you blow them away, you're going to be blowing away a lot of these creatures that help maintain life on Earth. So again, by doing less, we do more. As I mentioned earlier, also bees, 70% of our native bees live underground. And this is at the Island Drive garden. There's a nest hole. So if you see things buzzing around, at ground level, it's probably ground nesting bees. And I've never been stung by any of these native bees. So they're not really interested in stinging you. They're kind of too busy laying eggs and looking for pollen and nectar. You just be mindful of them. So if you have nesting behavior, that means your habitat is actually successful and that you have provisions for more organisms, which, I like to think of these native gardens as sort of a salad buffet. And I am the caterer. And so I've done my job in catering for the other creatures. But again, it's great to have a native garden, but these native gardens will attract insects. There's not if, ands, or buts. They will because it's food and everything likes to eat. And so food is a great motivator for everything. It is for me, I know that for sure. And so the goal for a native garden then, besides saving water and, cooling the atmosphere, is, because you're bringing in these insects, you want to help optimize the reproductive success for the insects that use them. And these things are super attractive to wildlife. And so you don't want your environment to be something that will kill them once they come to eat. It's like, here, have some dinner, and now I'm going to kill you. It's kind of not the point. And so some of the things that you can do to avoid creating an ecological trap and helping those insects and other organisms to complete their life cycle, which is eco-consciousness here, like we're connecting our habitats, the primrose garden and the Gwenda garden, via a corridor. A big thing that we can do is to reduce light pollution at night. So you've probably seen moths outside your window at night. They're attracted to the lights, and you can use blackout curtains to control light pollution at night, and so they won't be as attracted to those things. And what we find is that light pollution at night can kill up to 60% of those insects in a single night, because they're becoming exhausted at flying against these lights, and they're easy pickings for lizards and other things that eat them, because they're too busy trying to go towards the light, and things will eat them. Leave the leaves, of course, we talked about that. Eliminating the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Those things get into the soil, and once they're in the soil, where you have those 70% of our native bees nesting, it can actually interfere with the development of baby bees. And again, reduce your fumes from gasoline exhaust as much as possible, because pollinators and other insects use smell and vision to find food, and those fumes from gas-powered devices interferes with that behavior. So just a few things that are pretty easy to do to help things complete their life cycle, which is a wonderful thing. And so some final thoughts here about being an eco-conscious gardener. You're providing ecosystem services with these native plants, and amongst the other things that a native plant garden provides is that it shows you more about those interrelationships in nature. And once you see those interrelationships, the more that you learn how to become more optimal to enhance the productivity of your native plant garden. And it leads to an abundance of life with lots of things reseeding and being reborn. And that just, I think, enhances your appreciation and your particular role in caring for all of nature's complex beauty. And here we have a beautiful yellow-faced bumblebee on Gilia capitata. You can see there's beautiful blue pollen there. And then we have a masked bee on an Erysimum species. You can see how marvelous these creatures are. Just, the magic starts with native plants. And with that, I will be happy to take any sort of questions that people might have.
Yes, thank you for that, Juanita. Beautiful photography and amazing information about that. Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure.
Yes, so like we said, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we will respond to them.
We also have a small group. If you want to raise your hand and ask Juanita directly, we can unmute you.
Don't be shy. I know everybody's racing off now to go and buy some plants.
We did have a question if we can include the links to the websites that are in your presentation. Juanita, do you want to maybe send those over and we can include them in the follow-up email?
So those links should be live in the PDF version that I sent over.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we can send the PDF version out in the follow-up email.
Yes, it's quite a large file. So you might want to, I mean, it's like 24,000 megs. It's huge. So you might want to pull out a specific slide or something. But
That
if
sounds
people,
good.
yeah, and if people are watching it on the YouTube channel, they can stop the presentation because this will be posted, and then they can just copy the link there as well. So that's a possibility as well.
Yes, we'll make sure to get those links out.
Yeah, and you're very welcome.
Any other questions? We have a suggestion of a list of links in a text file.
Yeah, we could do that.
I have a question, if there's none at the moment. Oh, Pam says, thank you for a very informative presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to talk about it.
I was wondering if there's been a favorite project that you've worked on recently that you'd like to share about briefly or whatever.
Actually, there is a project that I did as a landscape architect for a private client, the kind of project that I live for. A friend of mine purchased a nice property up near Fort Ross, up on the North Coast, 2 acres, right on the edge of the ocean. And I know, and you know, the 3-hour drive up there was totally worth it because I did a biological survey of the things that she had growing there. And, you know, she wants to start it as a nonprofit where they're like raising the native plant species that they have there. And it was like crazy with the abundance of native plant species that I had not seen in nature before. And so we're going to collect seeds and grow some things out to sort of repopulate in some of the more degraded areas on the property. So it's those kinds of projects where I can do something super local with the biodiversity that's right there, and then sort of revegetate and regenerate things and enhance it that way. I tell you, it was truly a dream come true for me. I love that project.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Working with the land that's already there. That's Thank you for sharing that.
I was always also going to say, if people think about something later that they you know, have it's like a burning question that they didn't think of right away, it's easy to message me through Facebook or Instagram at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, and people can ask questions that way. And you know, just I hope that people are inspired to have their own front row seat to the big spectacle that will happen when they plant natives, because you know, it's just night and day when you see a non-native garden versus a native garden. The native gardens are alive in a way that a non-native garden is not. It's amazing. And that's when you can actually, if you want proof in the pudding, you can go and check out the Primrose Gardens in Palo Alto and just, you know, just see how everything is just like exploding with life. It's pretty crazy. And it's so fun to watch because there are all these bug dramas that happen. because bees fight over territory. And, the male bees, especially, they have territories and they'll like fly at you. And, they don't have stingers, so they're completely harmless, but they're like, this is my spot. And you get buzzed by them, and I've had them fly into my head. It's like, get out of here. It's so entertaining. It's wonderful.
That's awesome. Yes, blooming with life.
Exactly. Yes. Oh, you're very welcome. I'm happy to share this, and lots of great evening sessions are great because it's like you sit back, have a cup of tea, and dream about the morning when you can go outside and look at pretty things and listen to the birds chirping. In our neighborhoods where we have these gardens, it seems to me that we do have an uptick in bird life. In my own yard, sometimes I'll have 4 or 5, 6, 7 species at once, everything from woodpeckers to hummingbirds in my tiny yard all at once. It's insane.
That's beautiful. I know I've also noticed like a lot of birds recently. I thought it was just springtime, but maybe it's like something else. That's really cool.
There are a lot of restoration projects happening, especially like the Save the Bay people are doing a lot of native planting. And our gardens have actually inspired other people to do native plantings in their own cities. There's a person who did something actually in Sunnyvale, and there's a person down in Los Gatos doing one. And so these nodes of biodiversity that we have are, there's something very interesting about what those do, and that's why it's like, I don't want these to be little islands. I want them to be connected, because if you don't connect things, then you have the possibility that on this place things can go extinct. But if you have a lower population here, if they're connected, then you can have those species move from one place to another and then flow into those areas. So, the more we can connect these gardens, just the stronger things are and more resilient, and things won't go extinct on us.
Yeah, totally. I love that point in your presentation, how introducing different insects and everything makes it stronger.
It does. It's like every link in the web, the more strands, the stronger it becomes, the more tightly woven it is, so that if you pluck a few threads, the whole thing doesn't unravel, but everything else holds it together. And so, I think that I'm just kind of obsessed with native plants. So my approach is to keep adding things. And so far, everything seems to be getting along. There are a few plants that are kind of like pushy and push the other plants because they like to spread out. But I've just noticed that, things kind of seem to get along pretty well, and they kind of work out their own level of where they want to be and their equilibrium. Because, nature has a lot of time to work out these relationships, billions of years. It's like, I can try this and that, and I've got lots of time. And so we just have to trust that nature will find its equilibrium.
I like that. Nice.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions, but thank you to everyone who has attended. This workshop recording will be on the Bosco website, and we will be sending additional information with Anita's contact information and the Primrose Facebook website in a follow-up email. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you, Alexandra. You guys have a good one.
You too. Have a good night.